Welcome to the Underline This podcast, the podcast where we unpack the big ideas hiding in the margins, because the best parts, they're between the lines. Oh my brothers, have we got a real horror show of a podcast today? Only if you read the book will you get that reference and realize how clever it actually is. But the book we're going to talk about today is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. Now, this is a really unique book that's written in a different kind of slang. We'll talk about that here in a moment, but this is a twisted, difficult, but really high protein read for a variety of reasons. We're going to kick things off with a summary of the book, the author and his motives for writing the novel, unpack key themes around free will, morality, and the tension between state power and individual choice. At the end, I'll share some of my thoughts and takeaways. Now, A Clockwork Orange is a dystopian novel that takes place in the in the near future. It's a society that is plagued by extreme and nasty youth violence and overarching government control. Now, what makes this novel so unique is that it's written in an invented slang called nadsat. Takes some getting used to when you read it, but pretty quickly you're able to find the rhythm and understand what the words mean based on the context in the story. And that's by design. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Now, A Clockwork Orange is about Alex, a young gangster who has a passion for classic music, defying authority, and what they refer to in the novel as ultraviolence. There are three parts to this book. Part one sets the stage for who Alex is. And frankly, he's a real cheeky bastard. At 15 years old, he's delinquent and leads a street gang with his gents Pete, Georgie, and Dim. Almost nightly, they go out on crime sprees that range from robbery, assault, and rape. Again, I'll emphasize the term used in the book, quote, ultra-violence. Now, Alex has a passion for his debauchery, and when he's home, he listens to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which symbolizes the beauty that he finds in this mischief and ultra-violence. And at the end of part one, Alex is betrayed by his boys after a failed attempt to rob a woman, which ends with her murder. And the police arrest Alex, and he's put in prison. Now for part two, state rehabilitation. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Alex volunteers for an experimental and extremely controversial rehabilitation program called the Ludovico technique. The best way to imagine this treatment is it's kind of like when your dog does its business on the carpet. So the dog is taken and his nose is shoved into the carpet where he left his business, and he's forced to see how nasty it is so he doesn't do it again. That's essentially what this technique is. This type of therapy is actually called aversion therapy, where Alex is forced to watch violent films while given drugs that induce nausea. Essentially, the logic here is that it rewires the brain by conditioning him to feel sick at any thoughts of violence or sex. Now, while watching the films, the scientists play Beethoven's music, which leaves Alex unable to enjoy his favorite symphonies. After long sessions, Alex is, quote, reformed, but literally stripped of free will. He doesn't have agency, and he's left unable to commit evil, or really choose good either. And a quote that comes to mind from the book says, "When a man loses his ability to choose, he ceases to be a man." Now for part three, consequences and collapse. Released back into society, Alex is a victim. He's beaten by police, which includes some of his old gang members. He's humiliated by strangers and exploited by political groups to push their agenda against the current administration, which is still common practice today when politicians find poster boys that they can use as weapons against their opponents on the other side of the aisle. Now, disparaged, Alex attempts suicide by jumping out of a window, but survives. And it's in recovery that the government quickly reverses his rehabilitation in order to avoid public scandal. Now, it's worth noting that there are two different endings in print. In the final chapter of the restored British edition, missing in the original American one, Alex grows older and wary of violence. He imagines settling down and starting a family, which represents his move away from ultraviolence. Now, to me, this is a beautiful ending that suggests growth and the natural maturing of human nature, in contrast to forced state control. To me, this is really realistic as far as endings goes, because my take is that most people just get better with time. They grow out of their bad ideas, their childishness, and they see the light for better things. Now, I'll emphasize what most people do. Now, I'll just emphasize that's based on my experience. May not apply to everyone. Now we've given a summary of the book, let's talk about the author, Anthony Burgess. Burgess was born in Manchester in 1917 and passed away in 1993. And he was what, if you're not familiar with the term, he was a polymath, which means someone who is wide-ranging in knowledge. He served in World War II in the British military, worked as a teacher and education officer in Malaya and Brunei in the 1950s. It's interesting that Burgess was he was fluent in multiple languages, including music theory, and he also gave in-depth cultural criticisms. In total, he wrote over 30 novels, but his most famous literary work was A Clockwork Orange, which came out in 1962 and gained in popularity after Stanley Kubrick's 1971 film adaptation. Now, Burgess interestingly described writing A Clockwork Orange as a rush. When I say rush, I mean he got through it pretty quickly. That's just a paraphrase of his quote, but he didn't intend for it to be his defining work. There were several motivations and influences for writing it, ranging from personal trauma, his passion for philosophy, interest in languages, and being a critic to dystopia. And also, he had some financial concerns as well, which, when backed into a corner, he had to persevere. So let's unpack these together, starting with personal trauma. During his service in World War II, Burgess's first wife, Lynn, was attacked by American deserters living in London. As a result, that assault led to a miscarriage, which profoundly scarred Burgess and left him contemplating the nature of violence and brutality. He admitted that A Clockwork Orange was a way of confronting his trauma and exploring why senseless violence occurs. He was deeply interested in the philosophical question of free will, which is one of the central themes of A Clockwork Orange. And a major critique from Burgess is that he feared society would sacrifice freedom in the name of order. Now, some of his literary favorites include Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World. And Burgess's book shares many similarities, but the dystopia he's created shows a society where the government uses psychological techniques to strip away moral choice. And a unique writing creative storytelling technique used by Burgess is the language he created for Alex, protagonist, and narrator. This to me shows dedication to his writing and ability to create a new universe. This has been done by Tolkien, who was also a passionate linguist and was also the author of Lord of the Rings. And then George R. R. Martin in Game of Thrones also created his own unique languages. Now, the slang that I mentioned before is called Nadsat, which is a mix of Russian and English. And the purpose of doing this was to really immerse the reader in in Alex's world. And this was a creative experiment and kind of a way of softening the violence in the book through a linguistic filter. Because like I said, there's a lot of what they call ultraviolence in this book, but you only kind of know what's going on based on how he's trying to describe in this other language, which we, the reader, are not fluent in. Earlier, I mentioned financial concerns was another major motivation for Burgess. In 1959, he was misdiagnosed with a terminal brain tumor, and he was told he had a year to live. So he began to write as many novels as he could to provide for his wife after his death. And he later learned the diagnosis was wrong, but it was in this urgent state that he produced A Clockwork Orange. It's also worth noting that he downplayed A Clockwork Orange, calling it a minor novel since it felt like a rush to finish. He disliked Kubrick's film for what he felt it glamorized the violence and depravity of his characters, which I agree with. I've tried several times to watch the film, but it's too much for me to stomach. And the novel, as he said publicly, was intended to be a moral warning, a story focused on redemption, free will, and the human spirit. Now let's talk about themes. A Clockwork Orange has a lot of protein for us to break down and digest, so let's start with the themes. The novel shows a world where both unchecked violence and authoritarian control dehumanizes people. Now, Burgess's argument is that agency is essential to being human, even if that choice is evil. Keep that in mind. Themes found in this novel are really free will versus control, youth and violence, music's influence, and state power for rehabilitation. So let's start with free will versus control. Is it better to choose evil than be forced into good and removing agency? To make this more relatable, let's do a thought experiment. Would you rather have the ability to go grocery shopping or have someone else choose and deliver your groceries for you based on what they think is healthy and good for you? Let's go a level deeper. If you do your own grocery shopping, you have the agency to choose the quality of food, the cost, and even make your own decisions based on your lifestyles and health. The danger, of course, is that if you make poor health decisions, maybe you buy overly processed food, cigarettes, or even consume radioactive shrimp. That was the thing recently in the news with Walmart, just FYI. By removing your ability to choose, someone else can make that decision for you based on what they think is best. Now, for the other scenario, if someone is going to take the agency away from you, they might be protecting you from harm. Maybe they'll choose quality produce, keep you away from sugar and tobacco. Maybe. Or maybe they don't know more than you about what's best. Maybe they're not an authority. Maybe they get a kickback from what you consume. So they're only going to choose what benefits them over what's actually in your best interest. I'll stop there before I go into a philosophical hole before I can't dig myself out. But see what I mean? Agency is an inherent part of the human condition. Some might say it's a God-given ability. Given away in the name of control puts the controllers above everyone else. And that's a terrifying idea if that person abuses that authority. That really is corruption at its finest. And we see it today and throughout history. You heard the quote, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And also to quote the great Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And to add a twist to that, and with great responsibility comes great power. These quotes define agency and how it can be corrupted. And the Ludovico technique in the novel robs Alex of that agency, turning it into something less than human. Next thing, youth and violence. This is a story of teenage rebellion taken to extremes. To Alex and his gang, crime becomes an art form. To Alex, this is a symbol of what Burgess feared, which is unchecked teenage rebellion. Violence is horrifying and immoral, but Burgess thought through deep philosophical debate suggests it must remain an option. Otherwise, morality ultimately is meaningless. That juxtaposition of right versus wrong can only exist if they coexist. Alex and his gang's ultraviolence is a twisted rite of passage where rebellion against a society that offers no real meaning is a result of meaningless to them. Let's talk about music. The music that Alex loves and has a passion for is Beethoven. This symbolizes the beauty and the corruption of art. Now, it's interesting to see someone who is awful and a loathsome human having such a reverence for music. To me, this just shows the complex personalities that exist in the real world, and it humanizes evil. For example, if you're familiar with Pablo Escobar, the narco-terrorist, who was responsible for killing lots and lots of people and really holding a nation hostage in the name of drugs and profit, he was an incredible family man, from what I've learned. So it just shows that just because you're incredibly evil doesn't mean you can't appreciate things that are beautiful or good. Granted, he killed, tortured, and cheated on his wife, Pablo Escobar, but his children said that, actually, let's edit this part. So it's Alex's love for music, specifically Beethoven, which shows that humanity can exist inside evil. Some might call that hope for a wayward character. Now, when the Ludovico technique is complete, it takes away his agency and the ability to feel joy. The state destroys both his violence and his capacity for appreciating art. And the way I think about this is appreciating the sunshine after a big storm. If there's nothing to juxtapose against it, it just is. Last of all, state power. The government here clearly values order over humanity. They turn Alex into a, quote, clockwork orange. So let's unpack that. This is an organic object, the orange, on the outside, but on the inside has been turned mechanical. And the appearance of something natural, but internally it's unnatural and a machine. Now for my takeaways. This is a book that incorporates iceberg theory. I talked about this in the podcast about Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea, which essentially references it's a technique used to give ideas that appear surface level but have clearly deeper meanings. Now, the first time I read this, I struggled to understand exactly what was going on because of the language. But however, after doing this analysis in conjunction with reading it, the second round, I found it was very beneficial for my understanding, and I really learned to appreciate the story. That being said, I feel this is a extremely sophisticated novel. The ideas on free will, philosophy, and even its style make it unique, and one that I think will continue to be taught in schools for decades. Not elementary schools, of course, or even high schools, but in colleges. I'm sure the film helps, but it's too artistic and twisted for me. Not to say it's not an artistic achievement. It's just, again, not for me. It's just a personal preference. Now, reading in between the lines, how relevant is this to the real world? Surprisingly, it's not too far off, and here's why. State behavior modification exists and is practiced. Aversion therapy has been used in psychiatry to cure things like homosexuality or even violent behavior. Patients would be shown images and given electric shocks or nausea-inducing drugs. That way they associate X with Y and they become deterred. Its effectiveness, I have no idea. Another example of state behavior modification is the MK Ultra experiment, where a state-funded project created a brothel where women would slip LSD into John's drinks and see how much of their free will existed as they would interrogate them. It's a bit of a stretch, but just shows real-world efforts to explore mind control. I'd like to leave you on a happy note by sharing a quote, which is that it is as inhuman to be deprived of the capacity for moral choice as it is to be deprived of life. And that's what Anthony Burgess said. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I definitely did. And I remind you to give us a follow on Instagram, on YouTube, anywhere you get podcasts. But thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.